It happened a few years back. We, Mark, Sarah, Emily, Ben, and I, had been planning a ski trip to the old Anderson family cabin in the Rockies for months. The cabin had been in Sarah's family for generations, a rustic haven nestled deep in the mountains, miles from civilization. I'm Alex, by the way. I was looking forward to getting away from the city and spending some time in the mountains with my friends. I love the outdoors. We were all experienced skiers and snowboarders, the kind who crave untouched powder and the adrenaline rush of navigating challenging terrain. I'm not gonna lie, I also love a good party, and with us all packed in the cabin for a few days, I knew it was going to be fun. We loaded up Mark's SUV with all our gear. Skis, snowboards, backpacks overflowing with winter clothes, and enough booze and snacks to survive a nuclear winter. The drive up was beautiful, winding through snow-covered passes with towering pines on either side. When we finally arrived at the cabin, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, promising perfect skiing conditions. The first day was exactly what we had hoped for. We hit the slopes early, carving fresh tracks in the pristine snow. The sun was warm on our faces, and the air was crisp and clean. We laughed, we challenged each other, and we pushed our limits. After a long day of skiing, we returned to the cabin, exhausted but exhilarated, ready for a hearty meal and a night of storytelling by the fireplace. But as we settled into our evening routine, the weather started to turn. A low rumble echoed through the mountains, and the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows. We dismissed it as a typical mountain storm, nothing we couldn't handle. I remember thinking we should check the weather, but we all kind of forgot in the moment. By midnight, however, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The wind was a shrieking banshee, and snow hammered against the cabin with relentless fury. Peeking out the windows, all I saw was a swirling white abyss. We were completely cut off. "Well, this is getting interesting," Mark said, trying to sound casual as he stared out into the white void. I wasn't buying it. I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, grabbed the radio and started trying to tune into a weather report. All she got was static. "We're on our own, guys," she announced, her voice tinged with worry. We huddled around the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The electricity had gone out, plunging us into near darkness, illuminated only by the flickering glow of the fire and a couple of kerosene lamps. It was then that a sense of unease settled over me, a prickling sensation that something was not right. The next morning, the storm raged on unabated. The snow was piled high against the cabin door, effectively trapping us inside. We were forced to face the reality that we were stranded, miles from civilization, with no way to contact the outside world. "Okay, we need to ration our supplies," Ben stated, his voice taking on a serious tone. "We don't know how long this is going to last." We inventoried our food, firewood, and other essentials. We had enough to survive for a few days, maybe a week if we were careful. But the growing sense of isolation began to take its toll. The walls of the cabin seemed to be closing in, amplifying every creak and groan of the old structure. As the day wore on, the storm intensified. The wind howled like a tormented beast, and the snow beat against the cabin with relentless force. Tension began to simmer beneath the surface. "I can't stand being cooped up in here anymore," Emily blurted out. "I need to get out." "Are you out of your mind?" I snapped back. "You can't even see 10 feet in front of you. You'd be lost in seconds." An argument erupted, fueled by cabin fever and the claustrophobic atmosphere. Old resentments resurfaced, and the bonds of friendship started to fray. I could see the frustration building in everyone. That evening, as darkness descended once more, tragedy struck. Ben, restless and agitated, decided to venture out to the woodshed to gather more firewood. Despite our warnings, he bundled up and stepped out into the howling storm. Hours passed, and Ben didn't return. I tried to stay calm, but a knot of fear tightened in my gut. "We have to go look for him," Sarah said, her voice laced with panic. Reluctantly, Mark and I bundled up in our warmest clothes and ventured out into the blinding snow. The wind tore at us, and the cold seeped into our bones. We shouted Ben's name, but our voices were swallowed by the storm. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, and I was quickly losing hope. After what felt like an eternity, we found him. He was lying face down in the snow, a few feet from the woodshed. He wasn't moving. The sight of him lying there, motionless, sent a wave of nausea washing over me. We struggled to drag him back to the cabin, our muscles burning with exhaustion and despair. When we finally got him inside, we realized the awful truth. Ben had slipped and hit his head on a rock. His neck was broken. Grief and horror paralyzed us. We were trapped, isolated, and now Ben was dead. The weight of our situation pressed down on us with crushing force. The atmosphere in the cabin underwent a disturbing transformation. The grief morphed into paranoia, the camaraderie into suspicion. Ben's death seemed wrong, too sudden, too convenient. Mark started behaving oddly, becoming withdrawn and secretive. He would stare out the windows for long periods, muttering under his breath. Emily noticed that some of our supplies were disappearing. "Has anyone seen the extra flashlight?" she asked one morning. "No," Sarah replied, a puzzled expression on her face. "I thought you had it." We searched the cabin from top to bottom, but the flashlight was nowhere to be found. Other items went missing as well. Food, matches, even a small hatchet we kept near the fireplace. Suspicion immediately fell on Mark. He had always been a bit of an outsider, and his behavior since Ben's death had been increasingly strange. One night, I woke up to find Mark standing over my bed, his face obscured by shadows. He was holding something in his hand, something glinting in the dim light. A knife. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark didn't answer. He just stared at me for a long moment, his eyes wide and vacant. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I told Emily and Sarah what I had seen, and together we concluded that we had to protect ourselves. We started taking turns keeping watch at night, armed with knives and whatever else we could find. The atmosphere in the cabin was suffocating, a mixture of fear, distrust, and grief. Sleep became a luxury. The storm finally began to break on the 5th day. The wind died down, and the snow stopped falling. A weak sun struggled to pierce through the clouds, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. As we cautiously ventured outside, we made a terrifying discovery. Footprints led away from the cabin, disappearing into the distance. Footprints that weren't ours. Someone else had been out there, watching us, all the time. We followed the tracks for a short distance, until they led us to a small, snow-covered shed hidden among the trees. We cautiously approached, our hearts pounding in our ears. I slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The shed was filled with our stolen items. The food, the supplies, the missing flashlight, the hatchet. And in the corner, huddled in a sleeping bag, shivering uncontrollably, was Mark. He was babbling incoherently, his eyes wide with terror. "It's not safe," he kept repeating. "They're watching us. They're always watching." Emily and Sarah rushed inside and helped Mark to his feet. As we led him back to the cabin, a chilling realization dawned on me. Mark hadn't been stealing our supplies. He had been hiding them, trying to protect us from something that he believed was out there. Something he saw when he took Ben's death too hard. But what? The footprints in the snow didn't belong to a normal person. They were too large, too irregular, and Mark's fear seemed genuine, primal. The story ends there. We never discovered what, if anything, was out there. I am not sure if I even want to know. I just want to forget what happened. 8 years ago, I inherited my great-aunt Martha's farmhouse. My name is Daniel, and at the time I was a struggling writer in my late 20s, bouncing between odd jobs and cramped apartments in the city. The farmhouse was located in a remote area of rural Pennsylvania, miles from any major town. It had been empty for years, slowly falling into disrepair. Frankly, I jumped at the chance to leave the city behind and try my hand at writing in a peaceful, secluded environment. Plus, the thought of owning property, even one as dilapidated as the farmhouse, was immensely appealing. The house itself was an old Victorian, with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and overgrown weeds choking the yard. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface, and the air smelled musty and stale. Still, I saw potential. I envisioned restoring it to its former glory, creating a cozy haven where I could finally focus on my writing. I spent the first few weeks just cleaning and clearing out the accumulated junk. It was hard work, but I found a strange satisfaction in it. I felt like I was connecting with my family history, bringing the house back to life. As I worked, I learned more about my great aunt Martha, who had been a recluse, rarely leaving the property. Locals whispered stories about her, calling her a strange woman with odd habits. One afternoon, while tearing down some old wallpaper in the living room, I uncovered something unexpected: a hidden room. It was a small, windowless space concealed behind a section of the wall. Curiosity piqued. I carefully pried the wall open, revealing a dark, dusty chamber. The room was filled with strange objects. There were dusty books with titles in languages I didn't recognize, strange symbols carved into wooden boxes, and odd artifacts that looked like they belonged in a museum. My first reaction was excitement. It felt like I had stumbled upon some long-lost secret, a treasure trove of historical oddities. As I began to examine the objects more closely, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Many of the books dealt with occult practices, demonology, and rituals. The symbols carved into the boxes were unsettling. The artifacts were even more disturbing: a collection of strange masks, bone fragments, and tarnished silver implements that looked like they were used for purposes that made me uncomfortable. I remember a feeling of unease washing over me. Despite my growing discomfort, I couldn't resist the urge to explore further. I spent hours poring over the books, trying to decipher their meaning. I examined the artifacts, trying to understand their purpose. The more I learned, the more disturbed I became. I found a journal hidden inside one of the wooden boxes. It was written in my great-aunt Martha's handwriting, detailing her involvement with fringe groups and her descent into a world of conspiracy theories. She described her belief that the government was controlling our thoughts and that unseen forces were at play in everyday life. The journal entries became increasingly erratic and paranoid, hinting at a deep mental instability. The first couple of weeks I attributed these findings to merely a hobby of my aunt, but as I progressed with my reading, I began to find that she would slowly transition to a new state of mind. It seemed as if whatever was going on made her worse and worse mentally. After reading the journal, I found myself becoming more paranoid and anxious. The world began to feel ominous. I would often feel the need to look behind me. Even writing was not fun anymore, as I often got the feeling I was being watched. One evening, I was awakened by a loud crash downstairs. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously crept down the stairs, only to find the living room ransacked. Furniture was overturned, books were scattered across the floor, and the air was thick with an unsettling energy. It looked as if someone was searching for something that didn't want to be found. At the same time, one of the local neighbors told me that many had heard odd chants or noises coming from the farm at night, but no one had the courage to check what it was. He said he even saw lights in the house one night that were as white as snow. I did not believe him at first, but later on I would become very scared about those lights. I was losing my sense of direction and understanding. I would often find myself forgetting about days, and I would constantly experience what felt like hallucinations. It was as if I was descending into madness, much like my great-aunt Martha. I tried to resist these thoughts, but I felt I was in a state of continuous conflict. There was something evil in the air, making me hallucinate and go crazy. In the end, I left the house and never looked back. I moved out of the farmhouse a few weeks later. I couldn't bear to stay there any longer. The memories of what had happened were too vivid, too disturbing. The house seemed to have a life of its own. It was not a life I wanted to deal with anymore. I sold the property to a developer who planned to tear it down and build a new housing development. I didn't tell him about the hidden room or the journal or the madness that had almost consumed me. I never really understood what made me feel like that. Maybe the isolation got to me. But either way, I hope it does not happen to anyone again. To this day, I am haunted by the events that unfolded in that farmhouse. I often wonder if it was all in my head or if there was something truly sinister at play. But even if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the experience was real enough. The darkness had consumed me. Some doors are better left unopened, some secrets better left undisturbed, and some houses should simply be left to rot in peace. I never visit the area again and hope to never do so. Before we dive into the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching. It was 7 years ago that my wife Sarah and I decided to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary with a trip to a remote island off the coast of Maine. We'd been looking for a quiet escape, far away from the noise and stress of city life, and the brochures promised a secluded paradise. A charming cottage on a windswept beach, breathtaking views, and the kind of peaceful isolation that could rekindle a weary soul. We booked a week at Seabreeze Cottage on Monhegan Island. Getting there was an adventure in itself, a ferry ride from the mainland, battling choppy waves and a brisk sea breeze. But the moment we stepped onto the island, I was captivated. It was exactly as the brochures had described, a rugged and beautiful landscape dotted with quaint houses and weathered fishing boats. Seabreeze Cottage was even more charming than the pictures. A cozy, two-bedroom cabin with a stone fireplace, a fully equipped kitchen, and a large deck overlooking the ocean. The view was spectacular, endless blue stretching to the horizon, broken only by the occasional sailboat or fishing trawler. The first few days were idyllic. We hiked along the coastal trails, explored the rocky beaches, and watched the sun set over the ocean. We ate fresh seafood at the island's only restaurant, chatted with the friendly locals, and felt our worries melt away. The islanders were a close-knit community, mostly fishermen and artists who had chosen a life of simplicity and solitude. They were polite and welcoming, but there was something about them that I couldn't quite put my finger on. A certain reserve, a guardedness in their eyes, as if they were hiding something. One evening, while we were having dinner at the restaurant, I overheard a conversation between two locals. They were talking in hushed tones about the old ways and the curse. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, but it sounded ominous and unsettling. What was that all about? I asked the bartender when they had left. He just shrugged and smiled vaguely. Island gossip, he said. Don't pay it any mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. As the week went on, strange things started to happen. We began hearing noises at night. Faint whispers carried on the wind. We would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of scratching at the windows or the creaking of floorboards. We checked the doors and windows every night, but they were always locked. First, we dismissed the noises as the wind or the old house settling, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. We thought that we were imagining things, that the isolation was getting to us. One day, we found a strange symbol carved into the wooden fence surrounding the cottage. It was a circle with a cross inside, and it looked ancient and foreboding. I took a picture of it, but when I showed it to one of the locals, he just shook his head and said he had never seen anything like it before. I started feeling a prickling unease whenever we left the cottage, like we were being watched. I would catch glimpses of movement in the periphery of my vision, shadows flitting among the trees. When I would turn to look, there would be nothing there. Sarah told me I was being paranoid, but I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that we weren't alone. One afternoon, Sarah went for a walk on the beach while I stayed at the cottage to catch up on some work. A couple of hours later, she returned, visibly shaken. "You won't believe what happened," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "I found a doll on the beach, buried in the sand. It was old and dirty, with buttons for eyes, and it had pins stuck all over it." She said the doll was unsettling, and it gave her a bad feeling. I tried to calm her down, but the incident had a profound impact on both of us. That night, we had the worst experience of our lives. We woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone breaking into the cottage. We heard the front door creak open and footsteps echo through the house. Terrified, we huddled together in bed, our hearts pounding. We didn't know who was breaking in or what they wanted. I grabbed the baseball bat that I had found in the closet and held it tightly, preparing to defend us. The footsteps grew closer, and we knew that whoever it was coming for us. Then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. There was silence for a moment, and then a blood-curdling scream ripped through the house. I don't know what happened next, but I remember a feeling of overwhelming terror, a sense of being invaded by something evil. I don't remember most of the night. When I woke up the next morning, Sarah was gone. The cottage was in disarray, furniture overturned, and belongings scattered everywhere. The front door was wide open. The island community was not helpful, claiming Sarah went mad. I contacted the police, but they were skeptical of my story. They told me that Sarah had probably just run off, that she was unhappy in our marriage. But I knew that wasn't true. We loved each other deeply, and she would never just leave me. I stayed on the island for several weeks, searching for Sarah. I followed every lead, questioned every local, but I found nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I left the island eventually, broken-hearted and defeated. I have never seen Sarah again. I'm not sure what happened to her on that remote island, but I know that something terrible took place. I can't shake the feeling that the islanders knew more than they were letting on, that they were somehow involved in her disappearance. To this day, I am haunted by the memory of that trip. The peaceful isolation we sought turned into a nightmare, and the paradise we discovered became a prison. I'll never know what took my wife from me, but I know that the island took a piece of my soul. It was a few years ago when I decided to join a group of experienced cavers for an expedition into a newly discovered cave system in the Appalachian Mountains. I had always been drawn to the thrill of exploration, the idea of uncovering hidden wonders beneath the Earth's surface. My name is Ryan, and I had spent years honing my skills in rock climbing and spelunking. This trip promised to be unlike any other, and I was eager to push my limits. The group consisted of 5 of us: me, Tom, an old friend and seasoned caver; Lisa, a biologist fascinated by cave ecosystems; Mark, a geologist with an insatiable curiosity; and Jenna, a photographer eager to capture the beauty of the underground world. We met at a small diner just outside the town of Pine Ridge to discuss our plans over greasy burgers and coffee. The excitement was palpable as we shared stories about previous adventures. After gathering our gear, helmets, headlamps, ropes, and climbing equipment, we drove to the cave entrance, a gaping maw in the side of a rocky hill. The air was cool and damp as we approached, and I felt a thrill run through me at the thought of what lay ahead. We set up our equipment and checked our gear one last time before descending into the darkness. The cave opened up into a vast chamber, its walls glistening with moisture. Stalactites hung like fangs from above, while stalagmites rose from the ground like ancient sentinels. We switched on our headlamps, illuminating the intricate formations that surrounded us. Lisa immediately began taking notes about the flora and fauna we encountered, while Mark examined the rock layers with keen interest. As we ventured deeper into the cave system, we encountered narrow passages that required careful maneuvering. Each twist and turn revealed new wonders: glimmering crystals embedded in the walls, underground streams trickling through the rocks, and even small colonies of bats clinging to the ceiling. I felt invigorated by the beauty around me. After several hours of exploring, we decided to take a break in a large chamber that appeared to open up into another passageway. We sat on some flat rocks, sipping water and sharing snacks while discussing our next move. That's when Tom suggested we explore a side tunnel that he had noticed earlier. "I think it leads deeper into the cave," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We should check it out." The rest of us exchanged glances, but ultimately agreed. After all, this was what we came for, to explore uncharted territory. We entered the side tunnel cautiously. It was narrower than the main passageway and required us to crawl on our hands and knees at times. As we progressed deeper into the tunnel, I began to feel an unsettling sense of isolation creeping in. The walls seemed to close around us, and every sound echoed ominously in the darkness. "Are you guys sure this is safe?" Jenna asked hesitantly as she adjusted her camera strap. "Of course it is," Tom replied confidently. "We've done this before." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air felt heavier down here. It was stifling and damp, almost suffocating. I pushed my discomfort aside as we continued onward. After what felt like an eternity crawling through tight spaces, we finally emerged into another large chamber. It was breathtaking. An underground lake shimmered under our headlamps, reflecting the formations around it like a mirror. We all stood in awe for a moment before Lisa broke the silence. "This is incredible. We need to document this," she exclaimed. As she began taking notes and photographs, I wandered closer to the water's edge. The stillness of the lake was eerie. It felt like it held secrets just beneath its surface. I knelt down to get a better look when suddenly I heard a loud crack echo through the chamber. Startled, I turned back toward my friends just in time to see part of the ceiling begin to crumble above us. Rocks fell with alarming speed, sending dust and debris flying everywhere. Panic surged through me as I shouted for everyone to get back. "Run!" I yelled as I scrambled away from the collapsing section. We all dashed toward the exit we had come from, but chaos ensued as more rocks fell around us. Tom tripped over his own feet and went down hard. Jenna barely managed to grab his arm before he disappeared beneath a pile of rubble. "Help! Get him!" she screamed. I rushed back toward them as Mark tried to pull Tom free from under the debris. Lisa was shouting instructions. Her voice barely reached me over the cacophony of falling rocks and dust clouds filling the air. "Hold on," I yelled as I joined Mark in digging through the rubble. We worked frantically, but could feel time slipping away as more rocks threatened to fall around us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we managed to pull Tom free from under a heavy slab of rock. He gasped for air but seemed conscious, thankfully alive, but clearly injured. We needed to get out fast before more debris fell. With Jenna supporting Tom on one side and Mark on the other, we began navigating back through the tunnel we had come from. The path felt different now, more claustrophobic, as if it were closing in on us with every step we took. "Keep moving," Lisa urged as she led us forward with her headlamp illuminating our path. But as we crawled back through that narrow tunnel, dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. It felt endless. Each twist seemed longer than before. My mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if we didn't make it out soon enough. Finally emerging back into that initial chamber felt like stepping into daylight after being trapped underwater for far too long. But relief quickly turned into horror when I realized that our only exit was blocked by fallen rocks from above. "We're trapped!" Mark shouted in disbelief as he frantically searched for another way out. "No, there has to be another way," Jenna cried out desperately. Lisa began pacing around nervously while trying to assess our options, but each second felt like an eternity as panic threatened to consume us all again. Just when despair began creeping in again, I noticed something glimmering off in one corner of that chamber, a narrow crack leading deeper into darkness. "Over here," I shouted excitedly as everyone turned their attention toward me hopefully. We hurried toward that crack. It looked tight but manageable if we squeezed through together. And after some hesitation, we decided it was worth a shot. One by one, we crawled through that narrow opening until finally emerging into yet another chamber, this one larger than any before. And there, much to our astonishment, was an opening leading upward. "Is this an exit?" Lisa whispered breathlessly as hope flickered back into her eyes. Without wasting another moment, we scrambled toward that opening, climbing up through rocky terrain until finally bursting out into daylight. We emerged onto a hillside overlooking vast stretches of trees, the sun shining brightly overhead, feeling like salvation after what seemed like hours spent trapped underground. But even though relief washed over us, I couldn't shake off what happened down there. The fear still clung tightly within me, like shadows lurking just beyond reach. That day changed everything for us, not just because of Tom's injuries, but because we learned how quickly things can spiral out of control when faced with nature's unforgiving landscape, and how sometimes even our greatest adventures can turn into nightmares.